Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play one more turn of the great strategy games. Now, today I am very excited because we are starting a brand new basic tutorial for Gary Grigsby's War in the East, sometimes called the Beast of the East. It is one of the biggest games ever made. It's one of the best strategy games ever made, and it's in the argument for the best war game ever made. It's massive and it's a lot of fun. It's very well done. Now, I know a lot of people look at this game and they're somewhat intimidated by it or they think it's too complicated to get into. I hope to help you understand the game so that you can enjoy it because it really is a joy once you get playing. It'll really help you understand the war on the Eastern Front and everything that went into it. Uh, it's the greatest conflict in human history, quite frankly. More men, material, firepower, ammunition, you name it. More of that was on the Eastern Front of World War II than any other conflict in human history, and it's a really fascinating war to study and to think about, see if you could do it better, understand why the players, I say quote unquote players, the real life humans that made these decisions, why they made the decisions they did. And we're going to go into some of that, but mainly I just want to take this game, break it down into its component parts, and help you understand how to play it. Now, I know people have said, why in the world are you making a tutorial for War in the East when War in the East 2 is coming out sometime in the next few months? Well, I couldn't be more excited about that game, War in the East 2. So it's got my excitement level up for this type of game. But also, I've talked to people who have play tested War in the East 2. They have not told me anything they should not, but it has become clear that War in the East 2 will be additive to this system. It's not going to reinvent the wheel. It's not going to take one of the best games ever made and try to somehow completely reconfigure it. A lot of the systems are going to be the same, especially the ground war. And they're just going to add additions onto it. They're going to have better graphics. They're going to take some feedback from players of the original War in the East and try to improve some things. The air war is going to be a little different. My understanding it is going to be more like the air War in the West, which we will also cover on this channel, hopefully before War in the East 2 comes out. But the air war here, the air war and war in the West, they're somewhat abstracted. Now, you may know also on the channel we're playing War in the Pacific. That air war is not really abstracted at all. You're moving the individual squadrons around, you're telling them exactly what to do. There is some of that here, but it is a little more abstracted, and I think for good reason. Um, Again, this is the biggest ground conflict in human history. I think that the developers, Gary Grigsby, players in general, really wanted this to be more about the ground war, ground units. That's not to say that the air war it was not very important on the Eastern Front. Of course it was. Early in the war, the Axis, the Germans especially, had air superiority, and that made a huge difference. Later in the war, the Russians gain air superiority, and that makes a huge difference. And really, what we think of now as air power, air combat, was really, it came to maturation here on the Eastern Front. Of World War II. If you think about it, air war, air power had really only been around for 20, 25 years. It shows up in World War One, but it certainly was not what it became in World War Two, where control of the skies in some ways became dispositive in major battles, and that was not the case in warfare up to this time. That being said, what's on the ground and the boots on the ground are really where this game focuses, and I think with great effect. So, what are we going to do here? Well, if you've watched my videos before, I like to get our arms around the game first, kind of look at the big picture. The reason I like to do that is that's how I like to learn. If I jump in and we just zoom right down, onto these individual units and start talking about them, I feel like I don't understand enough of what's going on. for that to sink in. I like to get our arms around it. I like to talk about the big picture, what we're trying to do here, what you're even seeing on the screen, and then we'll break it down and go into every single detail. Now, if you're here and saying, well, I want to learn the game in 30 minutes, or I just want to see you run panzers around and blow things up, that's not really what I do here. That's not what this channel is about. I'm going to get down into the nitty gritty, every important aspect of playing this game so that you understand it. Now, I'm not sitting here and going to try to play it for you. This is a tutorial. I want to teach you how to play the game so that you can go write your own alternative history or just play it out the way it was done in real life and learn more about the war. Um, so we are going to start with this big picture, and as you see, I've got the map up here, and anytime that you've got a mini map like this, and only 1/3 of it can be covered at any one time when you're zoomed all the way out, that's always a good sign. But let's just move from the north to the south and kind of get a feel of what's going on, okay? Well, first of all, we've got a map key up here. And if you've watched the channel before, you know I love map keys. So let's go look at the map key really quickly. Clear, rough, mountain, light woods, heavy woods, swamp. We've got some smaller rivers, major rivers, impassable rivers. We've got coast here, ocean, sea. National borders, now that will update dynamically. We will see the borders change as we push into certain new territories. Uh, we've got cities, light urban, heavy urban. Now, of course, these will be treated differently for various bonuses and penalties, whether they be movement or defense, and we'll get into all of that. We've got railroads, which are incredibly important in this game. Railroads, I just can't overstate how important they are because as the Germans, your biggest problem is supplying your troops with fuel and supplies. And like a lot of Grigsby games, fuel and supply are his abstractions of all of the makings of war. But especially fuel, your panzers will be running across Russia. But, your biggest problem is not the Russian troops, it's getting gas into their gas tanks so they can keep going. And then later on, once winter sets in, getting supplies to your troops. And a big part of that is how you manage the railroad. There are special units for railroads. We'll get into all of that, of course. Town, city, major city, and a national capital. Okay, now the hexes in this game, you see the light hexes here. As we scoot in, you can see the hexes much better. Those are 10 miles. So think about that scope and scale. All of Russia. My goodness, is Russia a big place, right? You think, oh, well, Russia, you get to Moscow. I mean, look how far you go until you get to the Ural Mountains and out here, even, it's another half beyond it. Russia's just a massive place, of course. But each hex is 10 miles. Each one of the counters, so this is a hex and counter game. It is a turn-based game if you're not familiar with it. So the Germans will go, well, I say the Germans, the Axis will go. We'll get into that. The Axis will go. And then the Russians will go, and you'll click in turn up here after you've moved all of your pieces. So it's a hex and counter game. Now up here we have the Finns. So we will be playing the Finns. The Finns and Finland had their own beef with the Russians. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but the Finns were uh, very they were spoiling for more fight with the Russians, so they joined the cause. Um, you see here the Russians have this olive drab kind of olive color. The Finns are going to be in blue. Now you may notice we have different colors on the counters. We'll go into that. Um, Basically those can be corps, they can be armies. We'll talk about that. This game is set up. These counters are generally divisions. It's played at the division level, and we'll have corps headquarters, we'll have army headquarters, but you generally are playing at the division level. Now I say that, but you can break those divisions down into regiments or brigades. you can break them down and build them back up, but the default unit, like here, default infantry unit is going to be a division. All right. Now you see these infinity signs here, and you say, well, what is that? Those are your air units. Air units are treated a little unlike they're treated in any other game I've ever played. These are actually airfields, okay? And so you'll have staging bases. Again, we'll get into all that. I'll do a whole episode on the air war in this game. Don't worry about it now. We will talk about it. I just kind of want to look at the big picture. So let's back off. We've got the fins here, okay? The fins are not immediately activated. Uh, Again, we'll get into it, but they will be pushing, and they have a zone that they really cannot cross unless certain things are met or certain objectives are met. Again, for a different time. Um, the Russians have some troops here. You have Leningrad, of course, which is the crown jewel of the North. That is where Army Group North, as you see, these are the Axis troops down here. These are all German troops. This is Army Group North. Its main objective, generally speaking, now, of course, you can play the game any way you want, but the main objective of Army Group North is going to be Leningrad. Historically, the Germans were stopped at the doorsteps of Leningrad. Lake Ladoga froze over, and the Russians were able to supply the people here of Leningrad not very well. I mean, in the winter of 41, tens of thousands of people starved to death, died of the elements. But we will be playing the Axis, and our mission will be Leningrad for Army Group North. Okay, so let's take this off of there. Now, there are certain steps along the way, places we'll need to capture. If we come down here, you'll see this is Peskov. Peskov is the first stepping stone here. Um, and one thing to keep in mind in this game, and this is just big picture, big strategy, as the Germans, really your goal early on is not destroying units, it's getting around units and surrounding them. And that's what happened historically is the Germans completely surprised the Russians, they got around the edges, and they captured millions and millions of men. Now you'll also see Riga here, Riga and Peskov for Army Group North. These are our stepping stones. Novograd, also very important. So 1, 2, 3. This is what Army Group North, and we'll get into all of the strategy of that as we move on. I'll probably turn this into a Let's Play, but for now, big picture, that's where Army Group North is heading. Now, why were the Germans able to surprise the Russians so thoroughly? That's been debated by historians. You look at the setup here on June 22nd, 1941, which is the historical start of Operation Barbarossa, and you say, with this level of buildup, how were the Soviets so surprised? Well, you would have to look back a little bit. On August 23rd, of 1939, the Soviets and the Germans signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. What that did was divide up, well, it was a treaty of non-aggression between the two countries. Hitler and Stalin came to an agreement that they would not attack each other. Secretly, they also agreed how to divide up Poland. And as you see here, the Germans start past Warsaw, deep into Polish territory. The Russians got the eastern half of Poland, and so these are the starting lines once we get to June of 1941. Stalin believed that Hitler, while fighting a war in the West, would never dare turn his eyes east. For anyone that had read Mein Kampf at that point, it was not surprising at all that really all Hitler ever wanted to do was turn east. But those are more discussions for historians. we're playing the game here. I just wanted to explain to you, why are we starting so deep in Poland? Well, the Germans and the Russians had split Poland up. As I said, Molotov-Ribbentrop was signed August 23rd, 1939. It was 8 days later that the Germans crossed into Poland and started what's generally considered the start of World War II in September of 1939, even if the Italians had already been in Ethiopia and the Japanese had already attacked China. For most people in the West, World War II started September 1939. So we're a full 2 years almost into the war. The Germans have overrun France. They have threatened, now the map only goes back here to Berlin, really, but they had threatened Operation Sea Lion to attack uh, the English across the English Channel, but now Hitler has turned his eyes east. A big problem is this invasion was supposed to start at least 2 months earlier, but the Germans kept delaying. They wanted to make sure all of their logistics were correct in true German fashion. But this delay ends up costing them dearly as they get out into the Russian winter, which they dearly needed to avoid. But anyway, this is Army Group North here, and Army Group North will be pushing to Leningrad. Just south of that, to the east of Warsaw, you have Army Group Center. And Army Group Center will be heading for Minsk and Smolensk. And those are the big prizes early on for Army Group Center as they push. And this is really part of Army Group Center as well. So Minsk here. You have the Panzers down here in light blue, and we'll talk about how the tank troops are shown here as units. You can see the tank symbol, the NATO symbol for mobile troops right there. Um, and we'll get into that, but this is Army Group Center. They will be heading for Minsk, Smolensk, and then ultimately the big prize is Moscow. But Smolensk, first of all, Minsk, and then Smolensk, then Moscow, one, two, three, sort of like in the north. Here in the middle, you have the Pripyat Marshes. The Pripyat Marshes are essentially impassable. There are some troops that operate out here and on rail lines, but really, Army Group Center heads to the north, and Army Group South, which we see right here, will head to the south of the marshes. Uh, and I have seen people play this way, and I don't mean any disrespect to them if they want to play this way, but this Panzer Corps here is, let's see if we can get back to it. This is Hans Guderian's Panzer Group force. I believe we can bring Guderian up here, and you can see over here, the the general here is Guderian. And we'll get into what all of this means, but this is the second Panzer Group. What was I talking about was the original point of this. Guderian went north historically of the Pripyat Marshes to start. Now there's all kinds of debate about what he did after that, and we'll get into that at some point. But I have seen what I consider a gamey way to play this, which is to take the second Panzer Group and head them south uh, for an advantage. And why is that an advantage? Well, because the best Russian troops on the front, these troops up here in the north and in the center are not very good. They're militia. They didn't really want to be here. They hadn't really been training much. They didn't expect a German attack. Um, and so these troops are very poor. Meanwhile, Stalin, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but Stalin had sent all of his best troops to the south and into the Ukraine for other purposes prior to 1941. This goes back into the 30s as to why there were better Russian troops in the south. In the Ukraine, the Ukrainians were not very friendly to the Russians and did not necessarily want to be part of Russia. And so that, and amongst other reasons, there are crack Russian troops down here it's a much tougher slog in the South. Well, let's look at the South here a little bit. You've got Army Group South. They will be pushing initially, and these again are still Russian troops. They will be pushing to Kiev initially. Once you get to Kiev, you have decisions to make because the southern front here, there are just massive, not that it's not the same to the north, but Moscow is, like here on the map. Once you get into the south, you've got really massive distances we're talking about here. Kharkov, Stalino is very important. Rostov, Stalingrad is, I mean, look how far this is to get to the Don or to the Volga River and Stalingrad, the Don River as it runs up here from Rostov. And so this is the Southern Front. This is Army Group South. This, in my opinion, is where the war was really won and lost for various reasons that we will get into. Now, as we move further south, you'll notice all of a sudden, well, first of all, I do want to point out we have another Panzer group here. Okay, the Panzers are all important, and to the north, we have the 1st Panzer Group, the 2nd Panzer Group. As we get down here, they're part of the I'm sorry, this is the 1st Panzer Group. I believe this is the 4th up here. We'll look at all that. It's unimportant for now. But as we get further down here, you'll notice we've got some different colors. We've got Hungary here, and you've got Hungarian troops. Hungary was part of the Axis and pushed in the south. So you've got Hungarian troops. You will have, as we go to uh, Belgrade here, you've got Italian troops. So there are Italian troops out here in yellow. Hungarian is this greenish color. You then have Romanian troops. So here is Romania, and you will have Romanian troops. These troops up here are also, let's see, those are German. These are also Romanian troops here. And so you've got several different countries and different these are Romanian troops, sorry. Yep. So the dark purple are Romanian and the lighter are Romanian. These Romanian troops, these Hungarian troops, there are Czech troops, Italian troops. So you really are playing the Axis. It's not just the Germans. They will be pushing um, here to the Crimea. Odessa is a very tough nut to crack, but they will be pushing here into the Crimea and then on into what Hitler hoped would be down into Baku, which is here, and the oil producing regions once you get through the Crimea. Of course, there was tremendous fighting in the Crimea in World War II historically. Sevastopol is a huge fortification that we'll be talking about as we start to play the game, because I will be playing the game as we get into the basics. So that is kind of the big map. Now, one thing I want to talk about, and we're going to go back to the start screen as we get going here in this episode, but one thing I wanted to talk about is we will be playing a scenario that is called the bitter end. That is the grand scenario. It is the same as the number 1 scenario in this, which is the grand campaign. Now that runs from June 22nd, 1941 until October of 1945. Now we talked about hexes. Those are 10 miles, okay? Most of these units are divisions, and each turn is 1 week. I don't think I mentioned that, but each turn is 1 week. So you would be playing each week of the war until, someone resigns, I guess, or until October of 1945. Now, in the regular Grand Campaign, there's not points per se, I guess. It shows you the casualties. There are quote unquote victory conditions, but they're really based on casualties. And then it just comes down to, controlling land and where you are in October 1945. In the bitter end scenario that we will be playing, there are actually victory conditions and objectives, and you get so many points for holding objectives like Stalino for each turn and also at the end of the game. I just prefer to play it that way. I love board games, and that's how board games are generally, especially Eastern Front board games. You have victory conditions. It also kind of lets you know, hey, what's important. I think it can be a fun game within a game, controlling certain areas. So we're going to play that. Well, now, how do we know what those are? Well, one of the most important things that you'll ever learn in this game and in these videos is that shift. First of all, this is shift. You could also click on this if you want, but shift H shows you all of your hotkeys. Okay? So if you ever want to know where something is, what's going on, go to this because there is a hotkey for pretty much everything that you need to know in this game. And then it's a little intuitive, right? Show victory screen is V. Toggle victory locations on and off is Shift V. So let's look at those victory locations very quickly. Let's go Shift, and you see again, this shows it pressed down. I'm pressing the Shift key, that's why it's doing it, but you could also press this and then just hit V, and it would bring up, well, that didn't work. Well, let's do Shift V, and now we'll see the victory locations, okay? And let's kind of move out here a little bit. And we'll start back up to the north since that's what we did before. And you will see for the bitter end and really for the war itself, what was ultra important, the places on the map that you really want to be focused on. Well, we could get into the German ones, but those aren't going to come into play, hopefully, since we're playing the Axis until 1944 or 1945, and hopefully not at all. But Leningrad, of course, Moscow, of course. Now, I always have a problem pronouncing this. Voronezh, okay? Maybe I'll look that up and have Google phonetically spell that out for me. But I call it Voronezh. Sure, why not? Kiev, Kharkov. That is Kharkov, isn't it? I'll just make sure. Yeah, Kharkov, Stalino, Rostov. Rostov is incredibly important. Rostov on the Don. Stalingrad is listed as one. Now, there will be certain points for each one of these in this scenario. Sevastopol, here, and finally Baku. So these will be the places that we're really targeting as we do our Let's Play, as we play the game. Okay? But it's just places for you to start thinking about as you get into the game. These are the important parts. Now let's hit Shift H again and bring up our hotkeys because another thing I wanted to show you then um, is the production areas. Now, you're not going to really know what this means, but if you see here, show factory locations on or off. There are factories in this game. It's a little less abstracted, I find, than in War in the Pacific. These different places, well, I guess this is true in War in the Pacific, they produce certain things. Like there is a production facility in Stalino that produces T-34s if you don't take it over. But let's look at this again. What is this Shift L? I just want to show you where the big production centers are because these are places that we are going to want to get to and take over because they are big Russian production facilities. And you see them here, okay? And we can hover over Ochakov, okay? And it shows production, port 1, manpower, or port 10, manpower 1. Okay. Out here by Stalino, what I was talking about is you'll see there's heavy industry, armaments production. Um, here again, armaments, manpower, heavy industry. Well, the more I think about this, I guess it's been a little while since I played this. The more I think about this is very similar to War in the Pacific. The heavy industry, the manpower, the port, the armaments production. Very, very similar. Okay. Um, Okay, well, anyway, it gives you an idea of places that are very important for Russian production. And ultimately, that is the key to this war. You have to shut down Russian production, or it will overwhelm you. The Russian production just becomes massive. It becomes such that you, as the Axis player, cannot keep up with it. And no matter how much you destroy per turn, the Russians can produce more. Okay, and so we will be looking at these production points. Tula, there's a bunch around Moscow, obviously. As we go to the north here, there's a lot at Leningrad, so taking Leningrad is very important. But it's kind of the places you would expect. That being said, we've got to get to these places and turn off as much Russian production as we can. Um, oh, I didn't mean to bring that up. Sorry. Let's click on this. Let's take off that and let's go just look around the screen really fast. All right. Before we go back and really just start up the game, let's look at the screen and what is on the screen. Okay, you have your jump map down here. Now there are 5 levels of magnification to this map. So this is all the way out. This is, out level 5. If we go in one, you start to see a little more detail here. You can tell at least what the units are. These are infantry, headquarters, air units. Okay, these are security units. They're usually in towns and there's security forces to hold a town, and we'll get into all of that. So this is level, what I would consider level 4. If 1 is the most zoomed in, 5 is the most zoomed out. This is 3, and we start to see a little bit more. Now we're going to be playing with fog of war and heavy fog of war. And so what's called even movement fog of war, you will have to fly recon flights to get detection levels on these things to know what they are. I always play games that way. I don't see a point in playing a game that doesn't have fog of war. You have enough advantages over an AI player. I like to be surprised sometimes. So let's zoom in a little bit more and let's, click over here on the mini map. And now, so let's scoot back once more now that we're over here. Again, you can start to see what these are. Double X are divisions. This is a motorized unit, okay? This is a tank unit. This is an infantry unit. Here we have a headquarters. This is a corps headquarters when it's got 3 X's. Um, if it's got 4, it's an army headquarters, right? Let's see. I think this is Army Group North. Oh, sorry. Here we go. This is Army Group North, so it's a full Army Group headquarters. And then here you have OKH. Sorry. Oh, I see what I'm doing. I see what I was doing. I was building up for an attack there. There we go. Okay, there's OKH. This is, 5 X's across the top. This is German High Command, OKH. There is a really, what I think is a very great and elegant command structure in this game. Command means so much. It helps throw your support units into the battles. It just means a lot. You need to keep every unit you can within command. It's how they get fuel, how your units get supply. It's how they get certain support units to help them. Here you will see a specialized rail unit. Okay. Oh, I see. I've got shift down. Um, these are specialized rail units, and they will help you with your railroads and rebuilding railroads. Now, one of the challenges here is that the Soviets were a little behind. Well, I don't know if behind is the proper word for it. Their rail gauges were just different. So, Soviet rail operated on one set of specifications, and all of the rest of Europe operated on another set of specifications. And so one of the challenges for the Germans is they had to go rebuild, or I say rebuild, basically completely newly build rail to the specifications of their rail cars, right? And so we've got these specialized railroad units that go out and do that for us. And it's a huge part of the game. In most games, you'd say, oh, it's a railroad unit. Oh, okay, that's interesting, right? It's not very important. in some respects, these might be the most important units of the game because the distances out here are so vast that you have got to rebuild the Russian rail to German specifications to get supplies going. Because if you look from here and start going east, very early on in the war, you're going to have units out here, right? At 10 miles every time, you don't have enough trucks in the world to get supplies from Germany to here. You have to use all of this rail line, and we will be focusing very heavily on that because ultimately, to win the game as the Axis, you have got to be the master. You have to be a master railroader. Let's put it that way. Now, again, you will notice with the different units, they are different colors based on the different corps that they're in or the different armies that they are in. And so this is in the, well, it's actually the different armies are the different colors on the unit. So everyone in the blue here will be part of the 4th Army, the 4th German Army. They're all in this deep blue, okay? Everybody in the light blue will be in the 2nd Panzer Group. And so those are the two big groupings, armies. And who do we have in the green here? We've got the 9th Army, okay? I'm up here on its headquarters, the 9th Army. Light blue, 2nd Panzer. So you've either got panzer groups or armies, and those are the colors that you're seeing here on the map. I believe maybe this is the 16th Army. This is one of the Corps headquarters, but this is the part of the 16th Army. I believe this is the 14th. No, it's the 18th Army. I'm sorry. And so it's 18th, 16th. Again, we'll get into all of this, but that is how these colors are sectioned by army or by panzer group. Okay? Um, so let's see. I wanted to. Oh, we were just going around and looking at the zoom levels. So this is all the way out, 1 in, 2 in. Start to see more detail. 3, this is the next to the last here. You can see kind of a whole front. This to here is all Army Group North. These pink, this is another Panzer Group. It's part of the 4th Panzer Group. And then all the way in here, you can really start to see individual armies, individual units. We'll talk about what this means on each unit. These are combat values. 28 would be the combat value. This is the movement value, or how many movement points this unit has. Okay, we will again be getting into all of that, but let's go up here and through the map. All right. We're actually going to take these 3 tabs from right to left. Why is that? Well, the administration tab is what's usually all the way to the left, which is, what do we have here? The hotkey list. So again, I told you Shift H, but you can also hit it here. You have Save Game, you have Options, and you have Preferences. And we will be going through all of these, but that is it. That's the administration tab, and you only have 3 tabs here. Um, Over here, this tells you what mode you're in, but we'll get into that in a second. And this tells you that you are running ground support missions. This is an air warfare thing that we will cover in air warfare. The X says, hey, quit and exit to the main menu. Okay, so that's administration. Easy as that, really. And from these tabs, all of the choices from these tabs will appear here in this bar. Now let's go to info screens, okay? Info screen, again, these are like the databases. If you played War in the Pacific, this is like your database buttons. This just gives you information. You can go look for things, you can sort, you can find things if you need to. It will tell you all of the information about your various units. That's what the info screens makes sense, right? This is the order of battle screen. This will tell you your basic command structure, okay? And we'll go through all of this eventually, but this tells you each country on the Axis side. I said access, like, oh, like access to a door. No, the access, I just did it again. The Axis side. So Slovakia, Finland, Italy, Hungary, Romania, and Germany. What does this tell you? How many troops, how much manpower you have, how many guns, how many tanks, how many planes, how many are actually active at this moment or can be used at this moment are operational. Let's just put it that way. Same for Romania, and you'll see here Romania actually, is contributing over a 500,000 men, a lot of guns. Hungary, you can read all this. It also tells us this for the Soviets, and you will start to see these Soviet numbers just go up in unbelievable numbers. Now, just starting the war, you can see here the Soviets have 3.44 million men, almost 3.5 million men under arms, 3 million of them operational, ready to go. We have, as the Germans, 3.2 million. Okay, so that seems pretty even at the start. Uh, for guns, they have us not quite 2 to 1, of course, but they've got us 1.5 times here on guns. Tanks, the Russians have 21,000 operational tanks. The Germans just 5,300. Luckily, these tanks are absolute trash, and you will be surrounding them and taking them. A lot of these are, AFVs. They're other kinds of vehicles. They're not even necessarily tanks, but these are, your AFVs. And then finally, planes, 3,100 to 11,000. Now, the difference here, right, is the German stuff is of a much higher quality than the Russian stuff. And then you have the other Axis allies that are evening up the score quite a bit. But your job as the Axis player is to try to knock down these Russian numbers as much as you can each turn because they will be getting added to over and over and over in tremendous numbers. But anyway, this is the order of battle screen. These will dynamically update, and you can kind of see how the war is going. Another screen just like that, ground losses. Okay, so these are your losses here. Axis losses, Soviet losses, current player, that would be us, of course. You can filter these things by turn, by logistic stuff. Uh, you can see ground losses, air losses, and we will be flipping over here to air losses quite often, and destroyed units. You can see units that are absolutely destroyed. Okay, so that's destroyed, ground losses, air losses. So again, these are all info. Show the production screen, and we'll get into this. Now, this game does model down to the individual items being produced. You will see, like this is the 88C dive bomber, the Stuka. It is the JU-88C6. We've got one of those, or how much capacity that we could build, how many built units, pool damage. You get the idea. We'll get into this when we talk about production, but this is the production screen. We have victory screen, and because we will be playing the bitter end, and that's what I have up here, it shows you your objectives. This is how many points you get for holding that for a turn or per each turn. This is how many you get for the end game, how many points you have, and this is how many points you have. You gain a point for every 1,000 Soviet men lost, okay? Um, Guns, AFV, aircraft, and then your total points. And we can kind of keep track how it's going. And then this game will end at the end of turn 225. It tells you who is ahead. So that's the victory screen. We have the weather screen. Now, this becomes incredibly important as we move into October, November, and December, and we will be looking at this. You can also tell on the game map because you will see snow. It will be very obvious once the frost and the snow and the mud, yeah, especially the mud come October, starts to set in. All of these hexes will start to get brown, but we'll see here muddy. And that essentially stops almost all movement and warfare on the Eastern Front. But you can see the weather screen there. Um, Air Doctrine. We will spend again a whole episode on the air war here. This is the way that it's abstracted, where the computer, the AI, will be flying missions for you based on the levels that you have set. So when I say the air war is abstracted, this is really what I'm talking about. You have this air doctrine screen. This is something that will change, I understand it, in War in the East too, but we will understand this so we can play the game. And there are slight similarities to the War in the West that, it will be helpful when you do play War in the East too to understand air doctrine. So we will go into that and understand it. Reinforcement withdrawal schedule, obviously very important. This will tell you on a turn by turn basis what's coming in, what's going out. Now you may see battalions here, and you may say, "Oh, I thought we were operating on the infantry level, or on the division level." We are, but this game actually is modeled. So we're operating on the division level as far as movement, moving units generally. It can be smaller if we break them up. But within those units, there are battalions and companies. Also, you have support units. We will get into all of that, but that's why you would be seeing this here. But of course, very important reinforcements and withdraw. You can always come here, see what's going to hit the map. And also, it will help, when these divisions hit the map, oftentimes as the German player, they will do so back here to the west, and you'll have to rail them up here to get them into the action. So that becomes important. The commander's report screen, potentially, possibly the most important screen in the game. This is everything. This shows you all of your information, starting from German High Command, the nationality. This will be the name of every unit that you control. You can filter this, of course, any way that you want to. This is very much like War in the Pacific, if you've played War in the Pacific, or if you're following along on the channel for that. This tells you everything: location, the type of unit, the headquarters for this unit, okay? Distance from the headquarters, how many men it has, morale, experience, fatigue, combat value, the percentage of its table of equipment that it has filled up, how much you want it to have filled up, movement points, okay? How many battles it's won and lost, you can come here and tell that. You can see support levels, maximum of its table of equipment. This just has everything. It will also tell you the overall stats that you have here. So as the Axis, you have 4.86 million men under arms, 45,000 guns, 6191 AFVs, um, and 4,100 aircraft. So you can see that. You can see headquarters, air groups, leaders. This game does model leaders. We will definitely get into that. Now, if you have been watching my War in the Pacific, you know I quite often say I don't mess with leaders in War in the Pacific. In War in the East, in this game, incredibly important who your generals are. We will probably spend a whole episode on that. Battles, this will tell you, what's happened, that you can filter. There are other ways you can look at battles and just tell how what's happened in the last turn or prior ground and air. Here are locations, so it'll tell you everything about Leipzig if you want to know that, or Hamburg or Danzig, you name it. You can look at it. And then this goes into all of your equipment. You see the different kinds of panzers here, when they start becoming available, when they end being available, upgrades, you can see it all. It's a ton of information. Now, I can tell you, you may now be saying, oh my gosh, this game is way too complicated. No, those things are all very nice to know. once you become a more experienced, advanced player. To play the game and have fun with the game, you do not need to understand exactly when the Panzer IV-F becomes available, why it's available, when it's to whom it's available. You do not have to know all of that. Those are more advanced features, and it's one thing I love about this game. You could play it on a normal, what's the best way to put this? On a normal hex encounter or in a normal hex encounter way, where you drill down here and you say, this unit, okay, the 269th Infantry Division of the 41st Panzer Corps has a combat value of 11 and it has 16 movement points. And you can play the game this way. You do not have to right click on this and say, oh, it's got 96 7.9 millimeter anti-tank rifles. You do not have to get this granular into the game. You can play the game and play it well and enjoy yourself knowing nothing more than combat value, movement points, and the supply situations and the command, who the commander is. That's it. Really, you can enjoy the game that way. So don't be put off by all of this information. Look at it as an additive. As you get to understand the game more, you can come here and you can say, "Oh, well, I could maybe, do this a little different or do that a little different." But in the big picture, you can play the game without ever understanding any of that. Event log, this is important. This will tell you what has happened last turn. And it's not just battles, it will also tell you different supply things. Just it's this is useful information. It's like in other games when you get messages, that's kind of your message log. Okay? So that is the info screen. Map information. Very important, obviously. And you'll see here, it's very simple. It's okay, we don't want to see units so that we can see the map better. All right, simple enough. Zoom in, zoom out. Great. Toggle enemy hexes. I always like to play with this on, and all it does is color the zone of, the control of the Russian player in red. Now, if you play as the Russians, it would do this for the Germans in gray. And I always play with that on. It's very helpful for me to see. The next is toggle fort levels. Now, there are defensive forts. You can build defensive forts. You can build up your fortifications. This just tells you what the fort level is. See ones and twos out here. And, obviously that's probably something you want to know, especially on this first turn, where as the Germans, as the Axis, we will be running headlong into some forts. And so that's all that does. Um, Toggle rail damage. Now, rail damage, I'm going to turn these off for a minute. Rail damage is very important because, as I said, you will be rebuilding rail all throughout Russia. And as the time goes by, if you do not keep a big enough garrison in certain places, you will have Russian partisans show up and blow up your rail lines. Now, I understand that's going to be even a bigger part of War in the East too. uh, this original War in the East game, one of the great games ever made. There are a few complaints that people have had over the years. Imagine that, right? One is the air war, and they're going to change that up a little bit. I actually quite like the air war in this game, and I think there are two different groups of people, either the people that love it or the people that just want a little bit more out of the air war. But the second complaint may be that partisans for the Russians are not active enough as they really were in the war, historically speaking. And so my understanding is that War in the East too, there's going to be a more developed partisan game. Now, partisans do show up. What do I mean by partisan? Well, it's just the citizenry, right? It's people in Minsk that do not like the Germans. They want to harm the German war effort, so they blow up rail lines, they blow up transportation depots, they kill men behind the lines, etc., etc. Well, as part of this, those partisan groups will damage rail lines, and you will have to do something about, you'll have to go repair those, because if that happens, it really hurts your war effort. If you look here in Russia, this is a major rail line that kind of branches off here to the north up to Smolensk, and you have a major rail line here that goes up to Riga and up to Peskov. But you don't have that many. The ones moving north from south to north, you have like two major ones. You have some going across, and then the ones here from that are going west to east. You kind of had two major ones here. And so you've got to protect those at all costs. Why am I going into all this? Well, because we can toggle rail damage. And so let's go down here. Now we have fog of war on the Russian side, and so it's showing us that. This is all red. And it's showing us that these green, this means this is all good. This is great. These are all repaired, quote unquote repaired, but they're in good shape rail lines. Those are in green. Once we get out here, we will see these in either yellow, orange, or red. Yellowish orange when they're being repaired by one of our railroad units. Red when they are impassable. They're totally wrecked, and we either have to build them or rebuild them. And that's what that is for. Uh, Toggle unit modes on and off. This is just the mode that they're in. I don't really ever use this. I actually had to just look. Toggle unit modes. Okay, yeah, I don't really use that, but you can toggle whatever unit mode that they're in. So if they're static, for instance, this is static. You see here static division. It shows up in white. It has no movement points. It cannot move. So you can look at these modes. Sometime later on, it becomes important because you could look at your reserves. Again, a more advanced concept than we're going to deal with right today, but we'll get into it. We can toggle units that are isolated, far from a railhead, so they have a supply problem, or receiving beachhead supply. Now, we're not going to have any of those right at the start, but you can do that here. This is factory locations. Now, remember, we brought that up on the hotkey list, but you can also do it here. This is build up or break down units. So this is actually an action that you can take. If we have let's see if we could, just kind of look at this infantry division. What if we want to break that up? See, we can break it into three parts. These would be like regiments or maybe brigades, but we can break these down. I think in this game they're called regiments when you break them. But see, we just broke that into three. And you see this, I think that's the regimental symbol. So you can break these down and then you can build them back up. And we just did that, and it's back to a division. This is create a fortified unit. We'll get into that. Very important. Once as the Axis player, you start switching from offense into a bit of defense. This becomes extremely important. These are more. This is a more advanced concept that we'll get into when we talk about. We'll have a whole episode about headquarters. We have weather zones on and off. Um, we're not going to look at that right now. I think that you have to be, well, I guess we can't do it because we have fog of war over here, or it's showing us that from the weather screen. Uh, I'll look that up. I just can't remember. Victory locations, we already looked at that. So that is basically all three of these tabs. Move is talking about these buttons down here. So this is the mode that you're in at the moment, okay? And again, this GS on, we'll talk about that. That has to do with the air war. So we're going to talk about these modes next time when we come back. We'll talk about modes. We'll also talk about what is this, what is a soft factor, but what it has to do is what you're seeing here on the unit card, this green that you're seeing here. Um, Up here, you see the date, turn one, okay, fine. You see where our hex, right now we're on this hex, which just happens to be Memel, but we don't have to be on a town, so it would show nothing. But if we are on a town, where were we here? Yeah, Memel, and it does have a port. just so you know that. Vehicle pool, we will talk about that in an upcoming episode. 30, these are political points. So just like all other Gary Grigsby games, you can spend political points to do certain things. You only get so many of them, but you can spend them to replace generals, maybe do other things, build fortified units, uh, amongst other things. Weather and ice level. And again, we will be getting into all of that. And with that, we're coming up here to the hour mark, and this is really what I wanted to cover. And as you can see, we are going to get down deep into this game. I wanted to go through all the buttons. Now, next time when we come back, I am going to go to the start screen. I'm going to go through your options and preferences, and we are going to start a game. Then we will start to talk about movement and different air functions. We'll talk about our units and unit cards and what all of this means, why it's important. Then we're going to get into headquarters, air units. There's a lot to cover with this game, but I'm telling you right now, it's not nearly as complicated as you may have thought. It is something you can definitely learn, and hopefully I can teach you. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed making it. I love talking about this game. It's a great game. And I think if you just stick with this, you will definitely understand how it works. You can play it and really, really have a good time with it and think about this just massive conflict on the Eastern Front. So, with that said, I want to thank you from Gaming Strategy Dojo. What did I say? Gaming strategy. See, I'm talking so fast. It's Strategy Gaming Dojo. I should know my own name, right? Strategy Gaming Dojo. If you enjoyed this episode, please go, subscribe, get ready for the next episodes, give me a like, or go to the comments and say, hey, I want to know about this or I want to know about that. I always enjoy the feedback, or I can answer questions that maybe you had that came up during the episode. Always feel free to give me some comments. So again, from Strategy Gaming Dojo, that's who we are. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you next time.